Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Good topic for you today, a little serious. Let's do it. Have you ever experienced any paranormal activity? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. My older sister has a ghost that's followed her around for years. I lived with her once for about 3 months, and so much weird stuff happened in that time. All my sister would say to me when I mentioned it was that her ghost didn't like me being there. Things like going to bed with everything locked up and switched off, and waking up in the morning with the back door open, lights on, and the kettle switched on. One night, my sister and I were getting ready to go out, and I'd asked to borrow her liquid foundation. I used it and put it back where she kept her makeup. 10 minutes later, she's asking me for it, and it was nowhere to be seen. She accused me of taking it and made me buy her a new one and refused to listen to my side of the story. About a year or so later, when she was packing to move to a new house, she found the makeup in a shoebox with some old letters. The shoebox was in a zipped up suitcase that was underneath her bed. But probably the most scared I ever felt was one afternoon when I was the only one in the house, which never happened as 4 other people lived there. I'd arrived home from work and headed straight to the bathroom. All the doors and windows, etc., were closed. I was standing in the bathroom and started squeezing a pimple on my chin when a female voice in the hall said, "Stop picking your zits." It was loud enough and sounded real enough at the time I thought it was my sister, so I laughed, told her to F off, and asked what she was doing for dinner. No answer. I stuck my head out into the hall. No one there. I searched the house top to bottom, and there was no one home. I sat out on the front porch until someone else got home because I didn't want to be in there alone. I was in the car with my family heading into town. This required driving down narrow country lanes with just enough room for 2 cars to drive past each other. My mom was driving, and my dad was in the passenger seat, when all of a sudden my dad started going nuts, telling my mom to pull over for no apparent reason. He was extremely pale and shaking, and he was dead serious, so my mom listened to him and pulled into a little dirt area on the side of the road. We sat there for about 30 seconds. Then out of nowhere, 2 white vans came flying around the blind corner, racing each other past us. If we had still been driving then, we would have all been easily killed. After that, my dad was fine. Not saying it was paranormal, just extremely strange or lucky. Once when I was around 15, I was walking around where I used to live, which was deep in English countryside. I heard a horse approaching me from behind, which is common as there was a polo club nearby. When I felt the horse was close enough, I turned to let it pass. There was nothing there. The sound continued to get louder and quieter, as if the horse was passing me, but it was not there. There's nowhere it could have been. Creeped me out. My daughter called me from the future, wrote this a little while ago about it. I have a 3-year-old daughter now. About 3.5 years ago, when my wife was pregnant with her, I got a phone call from an unknown number. When I picked it up, it was a little girl who called me daddy. I told her, "Sorry, but you've got the wrong number." And she answered, "No, you're my daddy." I proceeded to tell her, "No, I don't have a daughter." And the little girl said, in one of the creepiest little kid voices I can remember, "Oh yes, you do, daddy." And then I was so freaked out and strung out on caffeine that I just hung up. My wife asked me what had happened, and I joked that our daughter had called me from the future. Sure enough, a few months later, we did have a little girl, and I was a daddy. Fast forward to yesterday, I was taking care of her and moving some boxes, and I heard her on the phone with Grandma. At first, I thought nothing of it. I then realized she must have used the auto dial herself, and I was impressed. Then I realized I needed to ask some questions and put the phone out of reach to prevent unwanted 911 calls and the like. When they were done talking, I asked her who else she had called, and she said, "Just Grandma and you." I'm 100% sure she didn't phone me yesterday, even though she maintains it and says we stalked. I checked the call log, and it has dozens of numbers on auto dial that she tried, and our home number is in them. So, while I'm sure it's just coincidence, it's a bit spooky. I love this. Real or not, coincidence or not, I love it. That'd be a good Twilight Zone episode or maybe even a short January horror film. Enjoy. I was awoken one night to a loud crash in my bathroom. I went in, and all of the things on my sink top were in the middle of the floor. I mean, about 3 feet away from the sink. Everything. Not just one thing fell over and knocked the other into the sink, but toothbrush, toothpaste, hair gel, face wash, E4, hand soap, all on the floor in the middle of the bathroom. What was even worse is that between waking up and going to check out the bathroom, as I crossed the landing back to my room, I noticed the light had come on downstairs. I went down, and both the hall light and living room light were on, except none of the light switches were in the on position. I had to click the switch on off to make them switch off. I was living on my own at the time, and it freaked me out a little bit, but I'm still in the same house and have had no other experiences. I will swear by this until the day I die. When I was a kid, I was riding my bike on some hills next to a bayou with my brother. I crashed at the bottom of one, and while trying to straighten my handlebars, a little girl with a German Shepherd was standing on the hill I had just come down and asked what we were doing there. We said just riding, and she said we shouldn't, but because a little girl was killed over there, and pointed into the grass. We looked, she was gone. We ran to the top of the hill and there was nothing. It was about 75 yards of open space to the road and fence. Ghost or a brilliant prank pulled off by someone that never took credit for it. A buddy of mine lived in a really old building, built in the early 1800s, I believe, in a really old small town in Texas. His apartment was upstairs, businesses were downstairs, the whole building was originally a small factory of some sort that had been remodeled for more modern purposes. There were some obvious this wasn't originally an apartment features, like a small door in his closet that seemed to lead to the strange empty space between the walls, but no real reason for existing. Even when the door would randomly blow itself open with freezing cold air, you could sort of write that off as being due to remodels of old buildings, and not all the kinks of ventilation and stuff being quite worked out. That's kind of the explanation he gave to the strange noises he would hear coming out of there too. Also, windows would always be open. Not windows he or his girlfriend had opened, just random windows around the apartment. He would always close them, and then later find them open again. Seems like faulty latches that just come open over time, and not a huge deal. Then he stayed home from work one day, and he heard the window unlatch. Not only did he hear that one latch fall open, but a second later he heard the window unlatched, then another, one after the other in order, as if someone was walking through the living room, unlatching windows as they went. Then all at once, each of the windows fell open. So he noped the F out of there for the day and came back that weekend to investigate. Things seemed fine. Nothing weird happened for a while. Then about a month later, his girlfriend experienced the same thing when she was there by herself. After a while, they got used to it. Just weird windows. Then, the final nail in the coffin, for the place was when they got a dog. The dog was a puppy, so it was inherently happy, playful, always running around doing puppy stuff. Except when the door in the closet blew open, or the windows unlatched. Then the dog would stand completely still, focus its eyes on something that nobody else in the room could seem to us, and the dog's eyes would slowly track around the room, as if it was watching someone or something moving through the room. Nobody could ever figure out what the dog was looking at, and it only did this right after some other ghost stuff started happening. They moved out after this happened a few times. Sure, I think that dogs and certain animals and babies can see things maybe we don't see. Yeah, I mean, was it a paranormal entity? I don't know, but something. When I was around 8 or 9, I had a camping trip on the USS Hornet with my Cub Scout troop. Not that I knew it at the time, but the Hornet is on many most haunted places lists. I got a horrible night's sleep that night. I remember waking my dad up every few minutes to ask what time it was. Around 3 or 4, I woke up with a horrible feeling in my stomach and sat up in the bunk. I saw a hazy outline of a person walking up the rows of bunks. I tried to shake my dad awake, but he just swatted me away. I think I just buried my head under my pillow. It wasn't exactly the shape of a person, but more of an oblong cloud that seemed to move like it had legs. I always have trouble trying to explain what I saw, but I've believed in ghosts ever since. The ambulance company I used to work for had a haunted ambulance, Rig 12. A lot of EMTs had their own stories about it, mostly involving weird noises coming from their patient compartment or the electronics going haywire, but I never put much stock in paranormal stuff. My personal experience was when my partner and I were in Rig 12 and posted in a rural community at 3 a.m., so it was pitch dark and dead quiet. We were both dozing up in the cab. I was in the driver's seat and she was in the passenger seat. I woke up to a muffled voice and initially thought my partner was trying to talk to me. I told her I was trying to sleep and rolled over toward the window and closed my eyes again. Then I distinctly heard a male voice say, "Oh my God, am I dying?" Followed by what sounded like heavy breathing for a couple of seconds, then complete silence. My partner and I both sat straight up and looked back into the patient compartment where it sounded like it came from. It was quiet for a couple of seconds. Then we heard the click of an oxygen bottle regulator and hissing like it was leaking. I turned on the compartment lights and we both piled out of the rig. Initially, I thought a transient may have climbed in the back while we were asleep and was messing with stuff. So we walked around to the back of the rig and opened up the back doors. No one was back there. I checked both oxygen bottles, neither was open. Needless to say, we kept the lights on in the rig and didn't sleep much after that. I don't know if I believe in hauntings, but I guess it would make sense for an ambulance to be haunted. Rig 12 had been in service with various agencies for over a decade, and had probably seen its fair share of patients die in the back. I rode it in a couple of shifts after that, but nothing else strange happened that I recall. I slept on the floor of my parents' bedroom until an absurd age because I thought my room was haunted. The event that finally broke me was one night I was sleeping on their floor, because company protects you from ghosts, obviously, when I heard the noise of their bedroom door opening. I opened my eyes to see a dozen or so pair of feet entering the room silently. As not to wake anyone else up, I tried to sit up and see what was going on, only to find myself unable to move. I looked above me and there was a figure, clad in a black suit, holding me down. That alone would have scared most people, but what paralyzed me with fear was his face, or rather a lack of face. It was blank, as if someone had stole it. All that was left was a mouth, a ragged oval that sucked at the air and stole my breath. I glanced down at the figures standing at my feet to see that they had no faces. They knelt down and held me to the floor as one put on a pair of gloves. They were going to take my face. They had theirs stolen and wanted mine to replace it. I would become one of them. I saw my mother's hand hanging over the bed, just out of reach. I tried to move to wake her. Maybe if I got to her in time, she and my father could escape. They could take my sister and get out before the faceless men came for them. But the men held me down as the gloved man placed a knife to my temple. He made a small incision and slipped his finger inside, pulling at the skin and tearing my face away. I struggled to warn my mother, but I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, vision fading as my face was torn away. I awoke to find my parents standing over me, lights on, dog going bonkers, and my sister standing in the doorway. Apparently, I had started shrieking in my sleep, and they couldn't wake me, before my heart finally gave out. My mother, who was trained in CPR, had to revive me as my heart had stopped beating out of sheer terror. After this incident, we went to the hospital where it was discovered that I suffer from pretty severe sleep paralysis that, coupled with a birth defect that makes my heart weak, had nearly killed me. Don't believe what they tell you, kids. Your dreams can hurt you. TL, DR. Sleep paralysis made me think my house was haunted for most of my young life, when finally a very severe episode managed to stop my already weakened heart. When I was about 6, my grandmother passed. Afterwards, my mother would frequently find me sitting at the foot of my bed at night talking to thin air. I remember a vaguely human-shaped glow that I instinctively knew was my grandmother standing in my door, way each night, but none of the conversations. I have seen the same figure several times since, even though we had moved several times, usually around the time of an important life event, i.e. shortly after each of my siblings were born. At about midnight, my father was in the middle of a heart attack. While we were keeping him calm and waiting for the ambulance to arrive, I was looking out the bedroom window, and in the reflection of the window and the mirror near the bed, I could see my grandmother, my father's mother who died 4 years earlier in that house, standing by my dad's bed holding his hand. He then told us he was feeling better, and the pain in his chest was going. Ambulance arrived 3 minutes after that, and he was fine. In the same house, my wife, who had never seen a pic of my grandmother, woke up one night and said she saw an old lady standing at the foot of our bed, smiling. The next day I showed her a photo of my grandmother, and she went white and said that was who she saw. My neighbor and I experienced a playful poltergeist for years. We called him Billy, though we didn't know the gender. I had come home from shopping and something was always put in a weird place. Milk in a cupboard, toilet paper in the fridge. I found laundry detergent in the bathtub once. Diane called after a trip to the store to ask if Billy had been around because she couldn't find a gallon of milk. We found it outside on her back step. He played with our babies. I would watch my son follow something with his eyes that was invisible to me. Diane's son did the same. Dropped toys being given back before I could do it. Sugar. Damn sugar. Every single morning the sugar bowl was completely empty. Billy was in a constant state of mischief. When I had enough, I would point to her house and yell out, "Go see Diane." Within 5 minutes, I'd get a call from her. Thanks a lot. She did the same to me. These things happened for the entire 2 years we lived there. No one believed us, not even our husbands. They didn't experience anything. I can't explain any of it. I had a good buddy that always seemed to get arrested. Drunk in public, resisting arrest, reckless operation, etc. One night last summer, I was searching around for his name in recent police reports online. Felt a strong feeling come over me. It felt as if he was disappointed in me. He was upset that I only thought of him as my bad friend. An hour later, I got a call that my friend had committed suicide earlier in the day.